Let's maybe start kind of by going back to our shared experience at Onlia. And I know that you joined a bit later in the journey than I did, but I'm so curious to hear your perspective after these years. What you thought really stood out in terms of culture at Onlia from the moment that you joined, and yeah.
Yeah, so when I joined Onlia, I had come from Four Seasons Hotels and Resorts at their global head office based in Toronto. And Four Seasons is a long-standing luxury hospitality brand. They have a very clear, very set, very defined culture,
Yeah.
very much rooted in a principle of the golden rule. And that culture is so strong that it actually attracts a lot of people to want to work at Four Seasons. It
Mm-hmm.
works as a hiring platform as well. And you see that from the very moment you step into that organization. The first day that you work there, you're given a book, and it's actually written by the founder, Isidore Sharp. And I believe it's called Four Seasons, The Philosophy of Business, or something to that
Love it.
effect. And the culture of the organization is really set from that first moment that you join. And it's then reflected in all the different touch points and service standards and everything from the Four Seasons brand, and especially in the people that work at Four Seasons. It's embodied in that brand.
Yeah.
So when I joined Onlia, I had come from a very established, long-standing culture into a new entity that was still
Mm,
trying to find its way.
yeah, for sure.
And I would almost say that it was a bit of a culture shock, to be honest.
In more than one way, I imagine.
Yeah. So at Onlia, for those who aren't familiar, it was a joint venture of an insurance brand from the Netherlands and a longstanding entity in Canada, and they were creating a new startup. And so, thinking about Onlia and the culture that we had to create, we had some microcultures on our
Mm,
leadership
for
team,
sure.
and some different communication styles, some different languages, and some cultural nuances that as a leadership team had to be navigated while we were also building our own brand identity and our own culture for this new brand Onlia, which was a very unique challenge. And I think as a new hire coming into an organization, in my instance in specific, when I joined Onlia, you look to leadership to really set
Mm,
the culture and the tone and to be the stewards of culture and set the example for what to expect from their teams. And I think at that time, we didn't really know what that was going to look like for us yet. And so it was this fun challenge of how do we create this unique culture, and how do we build this brand identity, and how do we translate that down to our teams? Um, and I'm so curious because I did join a little bit later, Bonnie. What was your experience like in trying to build that culture before the rest of the team members even got there?
yeah. A great question, and I've obviously thought about it as we were planning for this podcast. But the way I look at the culture at Onlia, it's truly kind of almost, I can divide it in like three or four phases. Where this initial phase where I came from the holding company in the Netherlands, this very intimate core team. We worked out of a basement, albeit in an office building, not literally a basement in someone's home, but it truly had these startup vibes. And I too came from like a very corporate world. Um, and I think that first phase to me was really like the changing the world type of vibe, right? Like, so we got into this joint venture now with two different stakeholders to report back to, and that led to like a lot more formalization of like processes, policies, choices that needed to be made. The team had also grown to, I think, more like 10, 15 people, which also comes with different dynamics. But then phase three, and I think that's about the time where you joined, where we were kind of clear, or at least clearer on the positioning in market. The leadership team entirely changed at some point.
Mhm.
My role, I transitioned into the role of CMO, so I kind of had a bigger seat at the table from a strategy, culture development, team development point, but we were also really getting ourselves ready for launch. So that's the phase that maybe I, in hindsight, am the most excited about. Like we had a team of,
Mm.
I think, somewhere between 15 and 30 people at the time. but people that were really hired for their alignment with our way of working. I think we only defined our values with that same team afterwards, but for alignment with this startup mindset, trying to bring change into this insurance world. But it also, on the one hand, came with more pressure to deliver because we had two stakeholders that were now sitting there waiting for a return on their investment, and some revenue needed to be generated at some point. And what I think across all those three phases to me was consistent is some level of like autonomy, kind of in a weird way. Like I feel like we really hired people in the Canadian market for their local expertise, and with the different departments starting to form, like marketing and the true underwriting and finance and IT, each were really set up to autonomously kind of do their thing, and that came with freedom, but also the responsibility to truly deliver, and with some sense of ownership. I felt like at that time, still everyone who joined had this feeling of like they were creating something of their own that they could individually contribute to. And then the fourth phase, and I think that is closer to when I left the organization to go on different adventures, but there was another leadership change, and it really kind of entered this new phase of like we were out there in the market, we were getting our first feedback, some things were not working, like how do we kind of evolve with this kind of real life interaction with customers too, right? But to summarize that, I think there were really different phases that we went through. Is that something? Do you recognize that?
Oh, absolutely. I think what resonated most with me was your point about freedom and autonomy and freedom and responsibility, and that everyone in those early days really felt like a creator, a builder. They were really excited to create something new, build the infrastructure and everything to really get things to launch. And then, like you said, once it was in market, it was a very different mechanism about how do you then optimize. You go from building to like, okay, how do we perfect this? How do we make this engine really drive demand? And it's a very different mindset and a different skill set when you're in operation versus building phase, I would say.
How does that compare to your experience currently at Steadily?
Steadily is interesting and a little bit different from Onlia. When I joined the organization, there was already a very intentional, thoughtful, and crafted approach to culture. And by that, I mean, my founder had created a number of tech startups previous to founding Steadily. And he'd spent over a decade pattern matching and collecting data points and really looking at what elements of culture have made these startups either successful or unsuccessful. Cool. And what can I take from each of those to put into my culture for the next organization that I found? And so he had put all this thought together. And when I met him and was exploring the role, I was sent a 74-page culture deck. And we still have that culture deck to this day. And that was 4.5, nearly 5 years ago. And it looks very much identical to what we started with our culture. And a lot of the thought and the intention that was put into building this organization is what we still practice and operationalize today. But in saying that, as the organization has grown, we've also modified certain elements of it to reflect our current ways of operating. And so I think we're on version 14 currently. So about 3 times a year, we go back in. We go back in as a leadership team and we say, we're starting to see that on the customer experience team, we have a very heavy culture of client experience. Is that something that should be reflected more broadly in the organization? Should client obsession be a new value in our culture deck? And should product and marketing and engineering also live by that value? And so it's interesting, like you said, as you start to go to market and you get feedback and your client is your number one, the number one stakeholder that you want to ensure your products are meeting, you do think about things differently and your culture changes.
I love that. And I do think one of the significant differences is also that Steadily started as a founder, like a founder, it's a founder-led business, right? Whereas Onlia was kind of an offshoot of an existing business, but in a whole different like country, cultural context, a different setup. But in the research that I did around culture, there was a lot to be found around founders, but also kind of the founder's dilemma as companies grow. Because and then there's another kind of anthropologist that I really kind of his work really resonated with me around how team size affects relationship depth, where and that's what I do recognize from like the Onlia days. Like with 5 people, you have this intimate core. Everything you do, you kind of discuss with one another, and you don't have to think about how you communicate. It's almost like telepathic, right? Like it's you understand each other, you without even using words. But then going from 5 to 15 is where you already have to be a bit more intentional about communication and making sure that everyone's still aligned. And some informal habits might start forming because you don't see each other like every minute of the day. And then from 15 to 50, it becomes more around like you get those microcultures that you referred to, like the various different departments. The role of leadership starts to kind of play an even bigger role in what they model and what they reward. But I love kind of how the founder-led approach, and it's not the only difference, right? But the founder-led approach and having this manifesto or culture playbook has really been core to the growth of the organization. I love that, and it's a really interesting difference too. But you also said as you were growing, there were some things that were modified, adjusted, and you're at version 14 right now. What would you say are some of the things that drove that?
I think, and we have this in our culture deck too, the biggest thing you find as the organization is changing, especially when you're in hypergrowth and it's a different company every 6 months, different faces around the table every 6 months, complexity increases really quickly.
Yeah.
And if talent density doesn't match that growth, you can end up in this unforeseen moment of chaos where you've got so many people around the organization that are building and creating, and you've introduced more complexity than you had intended. And so there's 2 ways that you can solve for that. And one is to squash out complexity everywhere you can possibly find it in the organization. Keep things very simple, do fewer things, and just do them incredibly well, and keep that hyper focus for all of your teams.
Yeah.
And the other is to keep a very high bar of talent density. And so that was one of the tenets of our culture that the founding team was very intentional about. They had a theory of a team that they wanted to create to grow the organization. And it was, what would it look like if we had 90th percentile talent in every role? And we only hired people who were the best at what they do in their industry. And we keep the bar really high. And that way, as complexity increases, so too does the talent density. And we can give freedom and responsibility to our colleagues because we can trust their execution. We speak often internally about the rare person that is going to pick up a piece of garbage off the floor and won't just walk by it. And that's the kind of people that we're trying to build our team with, is the responsible person who thrives on getting meaty challenges and solving complex challenges, and inspires their colleagues around them. We refer to it as a stellar colleague. And I think that's been one of the ways that we've been able to grow so quickly, is by just having a really impactful team.
I love that. So it's, did it also, just curious, kind of, did it also sometimes come with like capacity gaps because you wouldn't hire someone who was not that stellar colleague? So you may have had to wait for the right candidate to come along.
Yeah, I love that you touched on that. We do. We'll leave vacant roles open for 6 months or longer until we find the right person to fill that role. And I think one of the great things about having stellar colleagues around you is that people can lean in. They can wear multiple hats. They're anxious to learn new skills. And so while you're waiting to find that perfect rock star of a hire, you're also giving growth opportunities to the rest of the team and giving opportunities for them to really excel in their career and see Steadily, or any organization that adopts this approach, as a place of immense career growth. And that's something that is also really exciting for top talent. They want to grow. They want to grow with the business.
And what is how do you find stellar colleagues? Like what I mean, it's easy to say like we only hire the top 90% or the top 10%, but how does that work in practice?
A lot of networking. A lot of colleagues have worked with other colleagues at previous organizations and really stood out in those roles. And they're people that they want to build something new with. That's actually the case with our founding team. So our CEO had worked with one of our other founders at a previous role and was like, this is the type of person that I really want to build something new with. And it kind of organically grows in that way. And then, we have a lot of recruitment activities that we're also currently trying to build with our employer brand marketing. I'm sure, as you know, it's more difficult when you're in startup and you don't have the grand credibility of a Four Seasons luxury hotel and resort behind your name. You really have to try a little bit harder to find that top talent and convince them that this is the right journey for them to join you on.
Yeah. Yeah, it goes both ways, right? Like you wanna select the top talent, but they also need to want to work for you. But I mean, by the sounds of it, the culture at Steadily is a pretty unique selling point.
Yeah, it is. And the culture deck we actually use as a bit of a recruitment tool. There are people who we send the culture deck to, and they read the 74 pages, and it is the most inspirational thing that they've seen. And that was the case for me. I read it, and I firstly was like, wow, this is the type of organization that I really want to be a part of. And secondly, I was like, I've never seen a culture articulated this thoroughly before. This is incredible. And so it plays a really strong role in us finding the right people and vetting who is going to thrive in this culture before they even get to the interview phase. If it excites you, let's have a conversation. If not, it's not the right culture for you, and that's okay.
That's okay too. Yeah, great. Is there anything, and maybe we can think about it in both the context of Onlia as well as Steadily, but with the growth, like one challenge already was like keeping up with the right talent and hiring for talent that matches your culture and is kind of the best in their field. Was there anything else that you think, like, as organizations scale and kind of experience that hyper growth, are there any things that you lose in your culture or other challenges that you come across?
You touched on this earlier, and you do lose a bit of that close-knit teamwork with other team members that originally you were able to have a lot of exposure to when you were a smaller, close-knit team. And I think a good solve for that is things like skip levels, all hands, actively seeking out opportunities to connect with the individuals that you wouldn't normally come across in your day-to-day work, and getting a real sense of what their experience is like in the organization at a variety of different levels. That's something that we do quite often here. Yeah, I think that's probably the one that you lose the most as you grow.